So chapter 13, section 1, notes packet. We're going to be talking about the Spanish Empire. All right. The Spanish were really moving forward at this point and trying to kind of get in on world power, world domination, whether through trade or through um, setting up colonies. They were really trying to reach out, kind of get their arms of power out into the world, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So the Spanish conquerors of the Americas were known as conquistadors. You can underline that, right? Sounds like conqueror, conquistadors. You've probably seen pictures of these guys, the big helmets and the poofy things coming in on the boats. Their weapons brought them incredible success. All right. So, what weapons did they have that the Native Americans probably didn't have? What do you think? Anyone?
Steel weapons.
Well, they had steel weapons. That's true. What else did they have? These are we're finally starting to talk about something that's a big deal in our world today. Guns. Very good. They had firearms. All right. So the Spanish conquistadors had firearms. So imagine this. They even if there's only one of me, but there's several natives. If I have a firearm, I can probably take out more natives that then can kind of come at me, if you think of it from that perspective. Now, were these guns anything like what we have today, which, could be fired rapidly and all that stuff? No, not necessarily. But, if I have 30 conquistadors with firearms and there's 30 guys with weapons or with, let's say tomahawks or sharp objects to hurt me, I probably have a better opportunity of winning that battle because now I can shoot them, right? So just kind of think of it from that perspective. The forces of Hernan Cortez took only 3 years to overthrow the Aztec Empire. Underline that. All right, so the Aztec Empire was a massive empire, lots of people, and it only took these guys 3 years to take them out. So think of it from that perspective. These weapons gave these conquistadors a great advantage. Okay. Even think about today. A lot of people complain about the America putting so much money into their military. There's probably a good argument for that because they do put a lot of money into their military. But in a war, those with the bigger bombs or bigger weapons or more advanced weapons tend to win, right? Tend to survive. So when you look at it from that perspective, there's an argument on both sides of that equation, I would say. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree with the argument, but there is an argument on both sides of the equation for having a lot of money going into advanced weapons in your military. Does that make sense? All right. So again, I'm not saying you have to agree with either side. I'm just saying that there are arguments on both sides. I'm a big believer in understanding both sides of an argument. By 1550, the Spanish had gained control of northern Mexico. In South America, an expedition led by Francisco Pizarro took control of the Inca Empire. All right, so we see these empires being taken out. You've probably heard of the Aztecs. You've probably heard of the Incas. All right. The Portuguese took over Brazil, which fell on their side of the line of demarcation. The line of demarcation was something that was set up basically splitting where people could go out and explore around the world. So, you would have the Spain and France deciding, look, you're on this side of this line, I'm on this side of this line. Let's not get in each other's way, and then we won't have any fights over certain land. Do we understand that? All right, so kind of like a line in the sand. Nobody really sees it. It's not like they put buoys out in the ocean, like, don't cross this line. But it was this line that they all agreed upon on the maps. In 1535, the Spanish had created a system of colonial administration in the Americas. Queen Isabella declared the natives to be her subjects. That's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Remember, we talk about how bad some people have been over their lifetimes of what they've done to Native Americans. Well, here we find a queen basically just declaring that an entire group are her subjects. That is, in essence, enslaving an entire population. Do we understand that? Again, so why do I bring that up? I'm a big believer in understanding all of history, not just United States history. If we only focus on United States history, it becomes this situation where slavery only happened in the United States. Did slavery happen here? Yes. Is it an awful thing? Yes. But it was a practice that was happening worldwide. This awful practice. And that's why, I think it's easier to understand why slavery existed in other places. It's what everybody was used to. Did it look different in places? Of course, but it's also something that I think helps us understand history a little more, in the fact that um, when America fought to get rid of slavery, it went against the grain. It went against what people were doing at the time. So that's a pretty interesting thing to think about. That something that was such a widely practiced thing and accepted, which I'll never understand why, but it was accepted, that certain people in our nation decided at a point in time, like, we need to stop this awful practice. And so, that's something that, if you don't know that it was existing worldwide, putting in place by a queen just arbitrarily saying, "You are all my subjects," you know, that's interesting to me, that it was so ingrained around the world. So it's interesting that there was a group of people that decided at some point, like, no, we're not going to continue this awful practice. We're going to go against that. So that's interesting. So she granted what was called to the Spanish settlers encomienda. Encomienda. All right, it's a Spanish word, and it means the right to use Native Americans as laborers. So encomienda is a pretty important word. She is in essence telling any Spanish settler that goes over here, you can enslave these workers, these people as slaves, these natives as slaves. So pretty important rule that she instituted. She makes it sound pretty, right? Encomienda, you can use them as laborers, but labor is another word, a cleaned up word for slave. Okay. Spanish settlers were supposed to protect Native Americans, but few did. Instead, they put them to work on sugar plantations and in gold and silver mines. Forced labor, listen to these, I want you to underline these. Forced labor, starvation, and disease took a terrible toll on Native Americans' lives. All right, so they were dying based on how hard they were being worked, the fact that they weren't being fed well, and diseases. Remember, these people were coming from another place, and they were bringing with them diseases that no one was used to, on these lands. We've talked about it before. If I go to another country, some countries I'm required to get certain shots before I go to those countries, because if I get a disease over there that I'm not accustomed to, my body might not be able to handle it, and I could die. A simple mosquito bite in Africa, let's say, might be carrying a disease that my body is not ready to fight off. Here I get bit by a mosquito, I'm probably okay. Little bump, little itch. Over there, you might end up dying. All right. One of my friends, I might have talked about this before, but was on a trip. He was doing some missions work over in Africa, and woke up one night, and he basically had lost all bodily functions, couldn't control anything, lost, not overnight, but lost tons of weight. They could not figure out what was wrong with him, and they ended up coming down with that he had been bit by a bug, a spider probably in Africa, and his body basically could not fend off anything. All right, all of his organs were shutting down systematically. They were bringing him back. He's still alive today, thank God, and he's much older than me. He's a mentor of mine. He's in his 70s, but he was lucky to live. So these people back then who didn't have modern medicine, if they got sick from some of these diseases that were coming over, they were dead. They had really no chance. So the native peoples had little resistance to European diseases. 30 to 40% of them, underline, died from smallpox, measles, and typhus. 30 to 40% of them. Today we have, shots that we get when we're younger that we don't deal with these kinds of diseases as much anymore. Measles has made a little bit of a comeback, I've heard. But basically, if you get measles today, you're still pretty safe. But 30 to 40% of the population got taken out by these diseases. So that's pretty sad. In the early years of the conquest, Catholic missionaries converted and baptized hundreds of thousands of Native Americans. So not only do you see people dying off, but we also see their religions being changed, systematically changing a people. Remember, we talked about one of the motives was religion, right? Was God, was taking God to these other places. So it's pretty interesting. They're not only dying off, but they're also, they're not only dying off physically, but they're also dying off, religion wise. Their culture is being taken away from them. They're being baptized into this new faith that is not a faith of their people. All right. Catholic missionaries converted and baptized thousands. Native American social and political structures were being torn apart and replaced by European systems of religion, underline, language, culture, and government. All right. Think about it today. How often do you walk around and see Native American culture in our world, in America? Not much. Not much. You see it every now and then, dream catchers and things like that. And every now and then you'll see some things from Native American culture. But Native American culture has almost been wiped out. And it's sad because it was such a rich culture. But again, it was systematically taken out as people were overtaking these lands. Um, you know, we see it was eventually pushed to just certain parts of our country, right, over the years. And so, reservations. And so that's an interesting thing that started back when the Spanish started taking over and aggressively continued to even today. A lot of Native American culture is basically on reservations. And we don't get to really enjoy a lot of Native American culture. So that is incredibly sad. All right. So that's the notes for today, the Spanish Empire.